Good morning, everybody. My name is Kurt Steinhaus. I'm the Secretary of Education, and I have the honor to be with you today on a very important topic. First things first, this is why we're here, the students of New Mexico. And I want to thank Principal Morris. When I was asked by the governor's staff, where should we do this press conference? I said, let's go to Aspen Community School. And to the members of the press, if you have a chance to visit, this is one incredible school. It's different than regular elementary schools because it has a partnership with the community. And this beautiful tapestry back here was made by the students. It's an example of some of the incredible programs we have here. The reason why we're here is to talk about reducing administrative burden. And there's an old saying with educators that you might not have heard. If you're in education, you're really good at addition and very bad at subtraction. And what that means is we are good at piling more and more things on. This, due to our governor's incredible leadership, is getting us better at subtraction. We are here to take a look at our data systems, our training requirements, and figure out ways under her leadership to make this happen. And with that, it's my honor to introduce our distinguished and honorable Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham.
Well, thank you, Secretary, and I want to thank the students and the ambassadors who greeted me today. I also want to thank Principal Morris and our incredible leadership representing both the National Education Association of New Mexico and the American Federation of Teachers in New Mexico. We have to work together to create an environment where educators are doing what they want to do. And what they want to do is teach. And what students want is time in the classroom, and I'm going to guess outside too. Yes? Okay. To have an environment that is nurturing, and we are moving away from that. And it's one of the number one issues that educators, parents, and students talk to me about. And certainly as a sub, I can speak to some of that. Now, I'm not required to do any of the paperwork, right? That happens by the administrative folks. And I'm sure if you're a long-term sub, that's occurring in that environment. But every single educator asked me that and took the time to give me, and I think I mentioned this before in talking about being a sub, to spend some time on the curriculum, right? To give me the logistics, to talk to me about the students themselves, not too many specifics, but look, these are their favorite subjects. This one can be tough. This is where I want participation in the classroom. This is where you're going to have to check that they brought their supplies and their homework. And then I would do the same in return. I would write whether or not I got through that curriculum, how the students did. And in doing that, I spent an extra hour, maybe, after my day was supposed to be over, hour and a half. And think about now an educator who has to log all of the progress each day. And we need that data, but just think about how we ask for it. All of the progress, all of the attendance, all of the outside of what was planned for the day, all of the accounting, all of the requests to draw down reimbursements, all of the data about ages, populations, health, what they're doing before and after school, who's bringing lunch, all of it. And I am minimizing some of the very complicated administrative efforts. And here's what happens. There isn't anybody in the country who doesn't want to know as much about how the learning experience is for you. What works? What doesn't work? How well are you doing? What would you like to learn? How does that compare to what the requirements are for math and reading and science? All the things that you know that you have to do a little bit of, or maybe a lot of, every single day. And what happens is we have national researchers that suggest you want this data. That gets embedded. All right, we have Congress that says if you want $1 of federal money every year, here's some new data requirements that go into the Department of Education. And the Department of Education at the federal level also has the ability right, to add administrative requirements. And then you get to the state, and we have two, the Senate and the House and the legislature here, both have education committees. The Legislative Education Study Committee, and it will look at what we think are gaps. Why aren't we performing as well as we thought? What's going on in social studies, right? We realized we needed to do something about those because they've been the same for 20 years. They create data, and then they tell us we're required to ask educators and schools to do it. And then we'll look at some of those data gaps in preparation for a question, and we'll add data. End of the day, the secretary is exactly right. We're just increasing that burden. And how many of you have seen your physician or your clinician not even look at you while you're in the exam room, but is in front of a computer doing the data about your visit and not spending enough time with the patient? Because we do that to them, that's why. And we've done the same thing in education. So today is very simple. Today is a formal commitment. The department's already been doing it. They've been reducing administrative burdens by looking at redundancies, a way to make it simpler, to think about ways to focus on education without minimizing. We do need data about how well we're doing, but to really think about it differently. This executive order is basically our office committing to paper that the department will work with the experts, students, parents, educators, principals, all of the leadership in terms of the associations, every bit of expertise so that the learning experience is better, and that we respect educators by giving them the ability and the power to teach in their classrooms. And the last thing before I sign this executive order is to tell you this is a school that exemplifies all that's possible. I thought they were going to boss us around, so I was excited to hear what it was, or make an announcement. Every school should have these kinds of community partnerships, and they take investments. You have to build the curriculum. You have to build the extra classes and services and programs. You have to have private sector partners who are helping you do that. That requires us to spend more money, and the legislature, to their credit, keeps giving us money. Not enough. So, Principal, I'm seeing some advocacy during the next legislative session. There is no reason why every school, elementary, mid-school, and high school, doesn't have a robust community partnership that allows us to build every kind of program that meets the unique needs of every New Mexico student and every New Mexico family. So I agree. Take a look around. It's not just the facade in the building, which is beautiful. Talk to the students. Talk to the educators. They will tell you the circumstances around the school make a difference for each of the students in meaningful ways. All right. Am I ready to sign the EO?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to put my name tag. These need better sticky stuff. Okay, no one seems to. All right. Here we go. Do you students know the story of my pen? No. You don't? You've never heard it? No. When I came walking up today, a bunch of students yelled, "Michelle!" which I thought was fantastic. And at first I thought, well, they can't be talking to me. And then they kept running and they were talking to me. So that makes me feel really good that you know my first name, that you know that I want to say hello. I want to know what's important to you. You are the future, frankly, not just of the state, but of the country. It's really important to me. My father was a dentist. He really cared about children's dentistry, and he had a dental office in our garage so that no matter when you needed to see him, you could come mornings, evenings, nights, weekends. He was always there. And a patient wanted to give him a gift for not billing them for those services, just being available to the community, being a good partner. And they gave him, this is a very fancy pen. It's called a Mont Blanc. And they're well known for having fountain pens. You know what a fountain pen is? So you have to load the ink and then the ink comes, into a kind of a smooth, it writes differently. So you might have to look that up, a fountain pen. My father gave me this fountain pen and said, if you follow your dreams and you get elected, and I'm not there, because I lost him before I got to this job, take this pen and sign everything that matters to you, every important thing, every bill, every letter, and it will guide and remind you about the things that you want to accomplish with the people in the state of New Mexico. And getting more time in the classroom and making sure that we're focusing on what you want and what you need is one of the most important things I'm going to get to do. So this is for my dad, and by virtue of my signature today, on Monday, May 23rd, it was a test. No one was going to help me, were you? Not a one of you. Okay. I am directing the Department of Public Education through the Secretary, working directly with stakeholders. That means the experts, students, parents, principals, superintendents, advocates, union members, to continue to reduce the administrative burdens by at least another 25% by the beginning of the next school year, so that we really are making progress and working together. And further, by signing this executive order, I'm directing the department to evaluate, without making another administrative burden, the successes of our efforts by working directly with you. So I'm going to sign this day, May 23rd, by virtue of my signature. I hereby establish this executive order requiring that administrative burdens be reduced. All right, thank you. Yay, yeah, it's not as exciting as a new playground or going to Disneyland, but I promise it's really good stuff. All right. Do we have questions? Is this where we go to questions, Maddie? Or are we having other statements?
Yeah, would you like to say anything? Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love that. I don't know what's happening. I didn't get bossed around enough this morning.
No problem. Good morning. My name is Vicki Holland, President of the American Federation of Teachers New Mexico. As a classroom teacher, one of the things I struggled with the most was never having enough time. There's a theme here today. I needed more time to plan meaningful lessons. I needed more time to make personal connections that turn a classroom into a home. I needed more time to do everything within my power to make my school community into the learning environment my students and families deserve. We are thrilled to hear that the concerns of our educators continue to be heard, and that a proactive, problem-solving approach has been taken to address these needs. Education is a people business, and our students should be at the heart of everything we do. By eliminating unnecessary administrative burdens, our education heroes can focus on doing what we do best, teaching New Mexico students. This is the next step of this administration's moonshot, and we are deeply appreciative of Governor Lujan Grisham and Secretary Steinhaus for thinking outside the box and taking continuous, meaningful steps to make New Mexico an amazing place to be an educator. Thank you.
Why not?
And I'm Charles Boyer, the Interim Executive Director of NEA New Mexico. Now, the last time I was in a classroom teaching was in 1992. Now, that dates me a lot, but one of the things I wanted as a teacher then was more time to do the important work of teaching. And one of the things that I really needed then was more time to work with my colleagues. And when I talk to teachers today, just as the governor described her discussions with teachers, that's what they still need. So this effort to say we're going to reduce the administrative burdens by another 25% provides the one thing you can't get any other way, and that's time. The only way you can get time in an already busy teaching schedule is to stop doing something and start doing something else. And I'm really grateful for the governor for signing this executive order. I've known Secretary Steinhaus for many, many years, and I believe he is the right person to get this accomplished. And because of his dedication to the work you do into these young people, it will happen. One of our major goals of NEA New Mexico, our policy and legislative goals, is to give teachers more planning time. Now, planning time doesn't mean time to do nothing. It means time to plan for lesson and work with these young people, but it also means one of the things we don't do enough of in the American education system is allow the adults in the system to work with the other adults in the system. For some reason, we think that the only meaningful work teachers can do is when they're in front of a classroom. There's other meaningful work teachers need to do together. And the only way we can provide that as job-embedded work is to reduce some of the bureaucratic aspects of the job and give teachers time to do that work together. So thank you very much. I look forward in August for us being able to talk about teachers being able to be the professionals they want to be and able to work together. So thank you.
They were trained to be.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up with a real example of what we can do when we have this extra time. So the staff at Aspen Community School has spent the last 3 years working with the Santa Fe Center for School Transformation. We picked up so many valuable tools, and one of them is learning how to weed our garden. And we've gone to project-based learning, and so through project-based learning, the teachers are combining content standards all in one unit. And so some projects might take 2 months, some projects might take 2 weeks. But once they've done that planning, they're done with their planning. And so, why require them to go through the standard planning submission practices that we've had in the past? And what's happened at Aspen, here's one example, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, I'm going to give you a 3rd grade reading proficiency. We started the year, 10% of our 3rd graders were on target in reading, and at the end of the year, 32%
Wow.
are on target.
Congratulations.
So I really believe our teachers know what they need to do. You're exactly right, Governor Grisham, and if we talk to them and listen to them, I think we'll get some good answers. So thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations.
I think we're good.
All right, now we're ready for questions.
And if you could start with on-topic questions, we always appreciate that.
So we know that one way of collecting data for students and teachers in the classroom is standardized tests, and we've seen an increase in those over the years as more data has to be collected. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe standardized testing will be affected with this new executive order?
Yeah, that is a very valuable question. I'm going to do some, I'm going to defer to the experts at the table. We have to do some standardized testing so that you've got a baseline, not just for the students grade to grade, but also across the state and the country. It has to roll up. But I do think that there are redundancies in how we go about that, including when the nation, in my view still, was misdirected and misguided to do these high-stake tests, where we were just teaching to a test and not doing anything that was organic and created the kind of analytical, right, responses that you need if you're building those intellectual capacities and supporting the confidence of students. So that's why we did away with high-stakes testing. But it does confuse, I think, some parents about, we're at the end of the year or we're at the beginning of the year and we're doing this standardized testing. What does it mean? Can you speak to a couple of areas where we think that we could amend or adjust so that it's more meaningful and less time consuming?
The governor said it really well, and I'll just get really concrete here for a second. The New Mexico legislature and the federal government appropriate money for schools. They need accountability on how that's going. They don't need a 12-hour test. A 3-hour test can do it. So that saves more time learning, less time taking a test. That is a tool that's useful at a state policy level. The second thing we want to do with testing is make it optional for school districts to decide what kind of tests, we call them short cycle assessments, beginning, middle, and end of the year, they find most useful in, if you're a community school, not only working with your teachers and students, but the community so they can see how the children are doing. And we heard a data point just like that. And then the third one that I'll talk about in testing is, this is real kind of nuts and bolts kind of thing, but it's a big deal if you're a school person. We have Superintendent Larry Chavez here. So when a school district or a school takes a statewide standardized test, we're going to design the system so that it goes to the school principal already pre-filled. So we know who the kids are, we know all the demographics. So instead of having to spend an hour with the students filling out all the demographics, it will come already filled out and ready to go. That's the third thing that will keep the accountability high, but reduce the amount of time that's needed.
Thank you.
Anyone want to add anything?
Just add quickly to follow up on what Dr. Steinhaus said. One of the things I've said for many, many years is that any standardized testing we do, anything we measure, ought to be about the teacher-student learning activity. It ought to be about the young people in the classroom, not about the adults in the classroom. And I think, as the governor mentioned, we went way too far in high-stakes testing about the adults in the classroom. Now I think we're moving back to saying testing is diagnostic for teachers to use about these young people in the classroom.
Awesome. Yes.
The governor mentioned her experience substitute teaching, but could one of you elaborate a little bit on examples of administrative burdens that might be lifted from a teacher that allow him or her to spend more time planning or teaching, either things you've already done or things you are going to take a look at soon? What are some examples of what we're talking about?
I can give you a couple of concrete examples. One of them has to do with the teacher licensure system. A dossier is currently required to move from level 1 to 2 to 3. That is many, many hours of work. And we are in the process with this executive order of looking at that requirement and changing it to something called assessments that don't even require the dossier at all. And most people call them micro-credentials. So I stopped there because that's kind of jargon. But that will reduce the time that a teacher needs to get their license. The second thing, and I did this as a school superintendent, I actually went back and looked at every federal, state, and local school board training requirement in my school district. And Whitney was a part of that district, and it was 2 pages of training requirements. So what can we do to help a teacher out? One of them is don't require the training that's no longer needed. That's part number 1. Part number 2, and Whitney was a part of this, we set up a system so that every teacher had a tracking system, and they had like their own little personal place where every time she took a class, she got credit for it. It was recorded when she took it, and that will simplify the process. And the third one is we make it easy for teachers to take the training at a time that's convenient for them. Instead of having them come in on a Saturday, we provide it electronically, and then they can take the test maybe during a planning period or after school. So those are kind of 3 concrete examples.
I could add to that. The Elevate New Mexico is the teacher professional growth system that we have here in the state. And the PED spent a lot of time revamping that, and it's excellent. And the PED was very responsive to the districts in that when we went into the pandemic mode, there was no way we could complete all of the elements because it was just an equity issue. Not every district in the state was prepared for the pandemic as Santa Fe Public Schools were. So they allow us to pick and choose from some of those elements to complement and fill the needs of what our teachers need.
And teachers, that's a really good example because teachers want feedback. They want to hear from the principal what's working and what's not working. But if you build a system that provides real feedback that's useful, then you're saving them time and making them a better teacher at the same time.
Are we also going to work on some of the costs of some of those tests teachers have to take to get certified in various things? I know the legislature's looking at that, but we're talking sometimes about thousands for a teacher just to get certified if they can teach in the state.
We are, and in fact, a lot of the professional development, I'm going to more generically, not tied to licensure, talk about that. We want to make that completely free to schools and school districts, and in a large part that's done, particularly for the things that we're asking folks to do. But there's lots of things that enrich an educator, and we want them to have more flexibility with their schools and superintendents to navigate that. And if cost is a barrier, then we aren't creating, right? We aren't, I'll just use the New Mexico language. We aren't elevating educators in the context, of their professional growth. And if cost is still a prohibitive factor, then that's something we have to do better at. So we've taken, I think, a good swipe at minimizing that and finding ways. We still talk about it in the context of scholarships. I don't love that, because if it's a scholarship, it sounds like some folks are going to get it and some folks aren't. And we need to make it more universal. So I think we're making progress, but we are not where we ought to be. Is that a fair description for how you feel we are?
And I'll also add, why do we need an executive order? Your question about the tests and the cost is another reason why the power of the governor in this executive order is important. The teacher licensure system has a reading test. That's in statute. All the other tests are under the authority of our governor. And so this executive order will help us take a really good hard look at those tests and the cost and the number of them, and figure out a way to reduce them.
Maybe the new standard is everybody in state government has to take these tests first. And if they do all right, then we'll think about applying them. And some folks are giggling and some folks are thinking, oh God, she's really going to do that. It's possible. Yes.
These are more number related. I don't know if you have the current numbers in front of you, but how many teachers would this impact across the state? And then how many teachers would this impact trying to get their license? And then I have another question.
I'm going to go to you.
What we're talking
for
about will
everyone.
impact every single teacher in New Mexico.
Do you know how many that is then?
Yeah, it's about 22,000 teachers in New Mexico. And it changes every day. And I have to brag on
We
our
want there to be more every day.
We do.
That's how this needs to change. More every day.
Absolutely. And I have to brag on the governor. Her decision to allow substitute teachers, and the licensure system was free. That made a huge increase. We have over 1,000 applications that we received in just the last month for renewals, and then another huge number of new licenses. So this should make it easier for all the people that are applying for a new license as well.
And then just one more question. So we were in Santa Fe a few months ago when you were doing all the pay raises for teachers, but we also talked about the great shortage of educators in our states. Do you anticipate then in the new school year we'll have more educators? Do you think that'll increase, decrease, change?
We are seeing an increase already, and that was the point about having 1,000 applications in the queue. It is working. Now we'll know exactly when we finish that work and know exactly who's teaching both for extended learning. That's occurring now, right now, for the summer, for extra days in the classroom, and we'll know exactly where we are in the fall. Now, what I desire is that New Mexico has no vacancies. That's probably not going to be the case, but there should be a considered increase, sizable, in the number of educators back in the classroom, and a sizable then decrease in what states all across America saw during and post-pandemic as part of any number of issues. But being in the classroom was tough. And being in the classroom or not being in the classroom and not being paid enough to feed and support your own families is a huge barrier, no matter how desirable, right? This is a vocation. Men and women who choose to be educators are like the first responders and like everyone in the healthcare community. It is a calling, by and large. And if you can't support your own family, you can't meet that calling. So we want to do better than that. We think today that the moonshot and the additional raises and the bump up in each of the tiers is meaningful. But I don't want New Mexico to be done because we've got a new line item that we can point to, right? We're the highest paid system for educators in the region. Until educators are feeling really secure about their families, they have financial security and reliability, that they're being treated with dignity and respect for the vocation that they've chosen, and for a clear environment where we need educators, this state should not be done showing its respect to educators. So I don't want this to be a one-off. I want this to be a new environment for people who choose this profession.
Can I add one quick point? One of the things we know, and I think Dr. Steinhaus could give us a number on this, you have a lot of active licenses that aren't being used to practice. And part of the reason for that is those folks left the profession for the very things we've been talking about. A, bureaucratic static. So we have a lot of folks who could walk into a classroom this fall if they were encouraged back and we had overcome some of the reasons they left. And I'm sure that's almost as many people, almost as many licenses as we actually have practitioners now.
Well, and now that we've got a change so that we can bring you out of retirement, right? We have every tool in the toolbox. And we did that for respect, sustainability, to show that this is a priority, education and educational outcomes, but also to think about ways to address these shortages, because that's not fair to the students, not fair to the administrators, it's not fair to the superintendents, it's not fair to the other educators in a school who are standing up everything else because there aren't enough educators in a school. It's not fair to the parents. So I'm feeling very good about what it's going to look like in the fall. I'm feeling good about where we are already. You'll have to ask that question again.
Jessica, I am wondering how exactly you're going to measure the 25% of cutting the administrative burdens, and you can kind of speak to like how those are measured.
Excellent, because I'm going to evaluate it, so I want to hear what the answer is.
I love that question. I was anticipating it. Sometimes we get kind of insular, and the old saying, you can't see the forest through the trees. So because of that, we're going to bring in an outside contractor, and they're going to work and take a look at us cold. They're going to take it cold and take a look at us and look at where we are and where we need to go. And I'm going to take their recommendations about how we measure that. So we don't have an answer yet, but we've got a plan on how we're going to get there.
And I would say they'll start easy, right? Here's 1,000 things we request. So you can just do pure math. So now it can only be 750 things. I don't want it to be. We are really looking at this from a more sophisticated aspect. That would be the easy way. A hard way is to do an analysis about the impacts we are making inside a school and how well we are addressing educators' desire to be educators and spend more time in the classroom and preparing for the classroom directly. And so that's going to come from having a relationship focused on reducing these administrative burdens with the people who are actually doing the work. But we want both, so we'll do both.
And we're also going to require teachers to complete a form telling us, no, that's a joke. I was waiting.
So excited.
Did you see me? I was starting to have.
I was moving this away from the governor so it didn't come my way.
Good one. I'm going to give you 4 points for that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I just had another question. Sorry. I guess I'm kind of curious how this is going to interact with fulfilling kind of the interrogatories of the Yazzie Martinez suit, because I know the plaintiffs are requesting more data, and we're talking about maybe getting fewer data points. I heard what you think about that.
I'm glad you're thinking about that, because I'm also thinking about that. And it's not so much fewer data points, it's making sure that what we collect is exactly what's needed and that it's not collected multiple times a year.
Right. And there's a disconnect. Not suggesting that the plaintiffs or advocates or stakeholders or judges are wrong, but as they're wanting us to be able to report progress, right? They want to see progress. We have a multitude of ways, and we want to make sure that what we're providing in Yazzie Martinez in the same way that I expect PED to tell me, are we doing better today than we were yesterday? Are students more fulfilled? And in the assessments where we do need to know, are we improving in reading and math and science and social studies and literacy, among others, right? What we ask for doesn't necessarily translate to that. So sometimes, and I agree, where the courts and the advocates have gotten frustrated, it's because in spite of asking for 1,000 things, it doesn't translate to the thing that they're looking for. And that is actually part of a system in this country. It's how I would say arguably you got to high stakes testing. You wanted to teach to a test. It had nothing to do with people's aptitude and how students were actually doing, whether they were going to go to college, whether they were successfully and gainfully employed, whether they could navigate any of those early adulthood, whether they were any happier, whether all of those things that we look for at the end, there was no difference between before high, in fact it got worse, than with high stakes testing. So the frustration is I'm looking for that magic so I can see the progress, but it's hard in the system that the United States has created to really get at that. So that's why we wrote a draft report to give people a sense about how we're going to think about it, how we're going to assess that data, how we're going to get engaged with stakeholders. And here's another example so that we know in real time what's going on in our schools and our classrooms, particularly with at-risk students, because those old data sets don't translate to whether or not we're making improvements. What it says is, you didn't do as well as I needed you to do on this standardized test. What about everything else? And so we want to have more meaningful, I was going to say it anyway, data points. We need to create a more meaningful system to know how our students are doing without discarding that some of that standardized assessments is meaningful so we can see what that progress looks like year to year. In between those two parameters is the sweet spot. And what I always want from one of the, if not the most competitive governor, because when you're winning on these issues, you're improving the lives of the people that you serve. This is another place where New Mexico can lead and figure out what the goalposts need to look like exactly and what we need to be gathering to show you that we're scoring. That's what needs to happen, and that's what I'm asking this group of experts to deliver to us sooner rather than later. We've made it really complicated in this country, and we don't have to. And I think we did that in large part when we were trying to dismantle public education. And what we're doing in New Mexico is restoring our commitment to the students and the families of this state to have a moonshot investment that will result in stability and success in our public education system, right? Lifelong education opportunities for every New Mexican, front end, back end. That's what we're trying to achieve, and this is another part of that effort. All right, are you guys, were you bored? Tell the truth. No, a little, you were a little bored? Was it kind of?
Any of you have anything that you need to say?
Yeah, to say? You did.
He said he was hungry.
Oh, you're hungry? I'm always hungry. I feel you. You appreciate me? That is, thank you. I appreciate you too. This is a hard thing to sit through. And it's, I just want you to have the best school and the best experiences that put you in a position to do whatever you want to do for your whole life. And you know what? Your decisions about that will change. Well, I appreciate you too. Thanks for having me at your school. It meant a lot to me. Let's go eat.
One more question.
Oh,
I just want to, at the very end, I wanted to save it to the end, switching topics a little bit. The U.S. Forestry Service just put out their statement on the prescribed burns and how they're canceling them for now. I just wondered if we could get your reaction to seeing that news almost a month after we've seen that wildfire.
we got that news about 20 minutes after my meeting with USDA. It's the right decision. I applaud that decision. It is exactly what I asked for. We have to take a pause on what we're doing. Your rules are antiquated, and while I want you, same thing, every tool in the toolbox, how you use those tools, when you use those tools, how you use those tools, and how you work with us, that has to shift. And you can't be doing what you did in New Mexico, anywhere else in the West, until we work together. So I applaud that decision. You will see that there will be now a concrete effort by New Mexico and the feds to get this right. New Mexico is going to be in a leadership position, including, I think it will lead to transformation in FEMA, which I have alerted New Mexicans is a very important vehicle for both getting the emergency relief and declarations and doing the debris removal and restoring the watershed. But it never was intended to make any American or New Mexican whole. Well, I find this to be problematic. We have to think about that differently. And I think they're going to. And they're going to work with New Mexico to do more, to think about it differently, and I'm still committed. We're going to find ways to make New Mexico, New Mexicans who have lost everything, as whole as humanly possible. And I expect, and I have no doubt that we will win, that the feds will do more here than typically they do in a number of places. Not because we're special, not because there's real liability, that's part of it, but because we've taken away a 400-year effort of raising livestock and growing food and protecting the water for the state. And this is a very different environment from which we need to take a look. And I think that we're going to have more meaningful efforts, which is why I also met with Homeland Security and FEMA about a number of issues. And I'll give a shout out to the Biden administration, in spite of the fact that they've heard directly from me. They have liability here. Bigger liability, in my view, than even Los Alamos. Big liability. I appreciate that they understand that the stakes are high, and they have to come in, and they have to come in for New Mexicans who deserve that from their federal government. And I'm feeling very optimistic that they are clear that they need to change a number of patterns and practices. So I'm grateful that they are hearing me and that they are working on delivering. And that may be the quickest turnaround of any meeting of a secretary, frankly, I've had in my career, and I've had a lot of meetings with secretaries. So, Mariana, I was intense in the same way that you've grown accustomed to.
Thank you for taking that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.